The Rogue Prince of Persia is currently in early access, and my initial impressions were positive. I had played an earlier build and was wondering how much content was going to be added because this game has a ton of potential, and I'll link that video in the description. The answer to that question is quite a lot, actually, some which really surprised me. If you happen to pick up the game now, you'll be treated to 6 biomes and 2 bosses. I said 6 because there are 2 that are hidden, the Hun Camp and the Grand Academy. These 2 biomes can be unlocked by speaking with NPCs through your runs, and doing so will also unlock the Mind Tree, which is where you'll find the lore that ultimately connects everything. In addition to these 2 new areas, you have new weapons, tools, and runes to experiment with, and as a heads up, the Falcata is the best weapon in the game because the damage stacks all the way up to 30, and it is incredible when you are fighting bosses and you are taking on groups. I mean that. It is an insanely powerful weapon, and I found myself using it during every single run. Now, the title for this video is Wait or Buy, and I know that value is subjective, but I'm leaning toward wait. Primarily because you're gonna burn through this content pretty quickly. Like most roguelikes, the game opens up as you progress through each cycle. This is a title that's going to have multiple story arcs, and while the mystery so far is interesting, once you beat the second boss, you're going to be pushed back to the starting area. It takes around 30 minutes or so per run, and that includes if you're being thorough through these levels. I mentioned in my preview that the game is on the easier side, which is more than likely one of the reasons why you're going to burn through this really quickly. The Prince in this game is mobile, and the traversal mechanics are responsive, and this allows you to navigate these areas with ease. And if you don't feel like fighting, you can just maneuver around enemies with little resistance. Your dodge will clear more than enough space for you to get around because you'll vault over enemies and then out of danger. But if you happen to feel like fighting, enemies can be stunned if they are kicked into one another. You can lock them into that animation until they are dead. By the time you reach the second biome, you are more than likely going to have all your rune slots filled out, and depending on your build, you might be nearly unkillable, and if you happen to have any of the runes that actually sprout toxic gas, you're going to clear groups of enemies pretty quickly. And what's insane is that the moment an enemy touches that toxic gas, it doesn't matter like how close they are to you if you just kind of lure them in. The moment they hit toxic gas, they're poisoned and the damage is magnified. So you're just kind of killing enemies with relative ease, which is really surprising, especially in like the later biomes. I was kind of shocked by how easy it was to beat large groups of enemies because I thought I was going to die through a number of places, but the runes and the different status effects really saved me. I mentioned that there are 2 bosses now. The first boss is relatively unchanged, and this was kind of disappointing because I wanted more combo strings, but instead what I got was a shield, and that is present in both phases. The weird thing is that in that first phase with that shield, it is tanky, and if you do not have a rune that increases damage to shields, this fight can feel really long at first. But once you hit that second phase, the shield comes back, but it's also lacking in HP. You'll just melt it very quickly, and then afterwards, you're just fighting the boss head on. And even though the arena has shrunk just a bit, it's still not difficult. So you should honestly get through that fight with relative ease. The second boss, however, is really fun. And I like the fact that the phases included a platforming section in which you have to outrun the rising darkness. I thought this was really cool and reminded me of Ori and the Blind Forest, but I will say that the fight, once again, like the first boss, was really easy. The only real threat was when the boss jumped up to do a sweeping beam, but once you dodged that and actually knew where to position yourself under a platform, he was not a threat. I was able to beat him on my first try, and that kind of surprised me, but I think what really took me back a bit was the lackluster damage output by this boss. Pretty much when I got hit the first time by the laser, I saw a nice little chunk get taken off, but in other attacks, you're just not taking too much damage. He actually has an ability in which he covers almost the entire arena except for one space, so you really have to move quickly to platform to that area. But I had noticed that the damage I had taken was relatively minor. So in my later runs, I was just tanking damage at the end just so I could kill him. Because there are moments where the boss becomes vulnerable, even after it comes out of a big attack. The damage output is really lacking. I'm hoping that as development progresses, Evil Empire adds more variation to the bosses in the way that Hades did. If I'm going to continue to make these runs, and I'm going to see these bosses over and over again, I want to see them change up during their phases. Mainly, I want to see them get a little bit more aggressive. I want to see them sped up. Because I feel like right now, these bosses just aren't threatening. And that's primarily because you have so much time between each attack, and there are clear gaps in which the player can get in and do damage. And I really feel like that needs to be sped up, or at least lessened, when you are going to fight this boss when they're in a critical state. I've always felt like in most roguelikes, the bosses should be the true highlight of the fight. And what I found was when they added a shield for the first boss, it just prolonged the fight. It really didn't do anything to add value to the fight. It just made it longer. And like I said, if you didn't have that rune that increases shield damage, you were probably sitting there wondering why this is taking so long. And then when you get into the second fight, there are a multitude of moments where the boss has a shield on them and then for whatever reason just kind of stops fighting you. They summon little minions to attack you, but they're not threatening. And then once you kind of navigate past that, you can just do damage. And I just was confused as to why there are so many gaps, especially in that second boss. Like, it was really noticeable when you could just show up and attack. I think it meant something to the story because clearly this is a boss that the prince might have a background with and looks like they really want to help, but it really felt like when they got into that critical state that the boss should be threatening and they weren't. But I will say that the highlight of these fights, honestly, is that platforming played a big role. I love the fact that you have to navigate the area to get to the boss, to get around attacks, to even do damage. I think that's fantastic because it really makes it unique to this game. When it comes to the new biomes, the Grand Academy and the Flooded Gardens were the big standouts. I really feel like the Grand Academy was meant to hint at what the Rogue Prince of Persia could be when it comes to level design. It felt like an homage to the older games. The level is large, features a number of rooms to explore, has a lot of cool traps, and requires you to explore the entire map to activate the door in the middle, which will lead you to the next biome. I love this map. I can tell that it was the first time that I felt threatened in any platforming section, challenge room or otherwise. You had large groups of enemies with some new faces being introduced, and this was all a part of the different trap sections as well. So you kind of had to think about where you were going to go to kind of get around, which I thought was fantastic. It's just well designed and a lot of fun to explore. I found myself returning to the Grand Academy during runs, even though it took longer than just running through the Tower of Oblivion. And don't get me wrong, I thought the Tower of Oblivion is really fun. It has a cool upper section and a really neat lower section, but it does not hold a candle to the Grand Academy. Now, the Flooded Gardens is fantastic too because of how quick you can traverse this level. There are multiple plat monsters that you can utilize for platforming, and I think it's kind of gross too because you're grabbing onto their saliva, and this is going to help you zip upward, but you're zipping upward to its mouth, so you got to quickly hop off and then wall run to the next area. I just thought that was really cool and also really weird, something that really took me by surprise. It felt like an area that was intended for fast traversal because if you do not choose to explore the central area, and that area is the one with the most verticality, you can kind of just head straight and clear a path through enemies to head to the final boss. I like the fact that this option exists, even though exploration in this game does yield good rewards. The problem with the biomes right now is that even with the added paths, there is little randomization in these areas, and this includes the challenge rooms that are currently available. I kind of understand it though. It would be difficult to randomize some of these areas because it could throw off the flow of platforming, which is practically perfect in this game. It is, however, very noticeable as you continue your runs. You will more than likely be proficient in mapping a path in the level even with the small variances, but I think that just a little more randomization would be good for the game overall. While my recommendation as of right now is to wait, I want to make it clear that if you do happen to pick this game up, then patience is going to be required. Early access is essentially a waiting game, and I have seen titles that were lighter in content than this at launch, but the developer has been transparent about their plans and are looking for player input as the game progresses in development. They are looking to try to add content weekly, which I think is pretty ambitious. I think I would be fine with monthly updates, but if they can do weekly, then that's cool by me. I know that currently there are players who are disappointed about the lack of content and balance issues as it relates to weapons, and that's probably a big one right now. I'm serious when I say this. The Falcata is the most OP weapon in this game, and it will absolutely help you clear runs with ease. But I do believe that as long as the developers commit to updating the game frequently and they stay transparent, I think that the Rogue Prince of Persia will be just fine. This feels like a roguelike that is far different than other titles. It is clear that Evil Empire wanted to emphasize platforming, and I think that they do an excellent job of implementing that here. Combat is also really good, and players are very capable regardless of the weapon they use. Being able to create a powerful build early is something I appreciate, but as this is a roguelike, players are going to want to be challenged like other titles in the genre. They mentioned in their Steam post that they will be looking to implement difficulty options, which will be great for this game because, as I've mentioned before, it is on the easier side. I've already stated that I don't think adding a shield for the bosses is adding challenge, it just adds time. I think that having different combo strings for these bosses will make fights more intimidating because as it currently stands, they're really easy to get through. I don't believe trading damage with the second boss is what the developers had in mind for that fight, but that's exactly how every run had ended after I'd gotten through that first fight. Just pointing that out. Every time I got to the second boss, me and him were just throwing hands. The lack of challenge really highlights the lack of content, but that doesn't mean what's here isn't good, because it really is. The polish found here is impressive. The blend of platforming and combat is executed well, and I believe that the developers are on the right track. I'm hoping that the final boss is added soon, because I'm interested in at least completing the first loop of the story, or at least the story arc, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the new levels scale because the Grand Academy should be the standard moving forward as you reach the palace. I think, and this is just a personal thing, that if those new levels do not match the feeling of the Grand Academy, I will be disappointed. I know that that area serves a purpose in the overall narrative, and it's kind of a side place afterward, but it's so much fun to explore and really showcases what this game could be in the future. While the Rogue Prince of Persia is off to a good start, and it's a game that I can easily recommend for fans of the franchise and platformers in general, I do believe that you should wait. Investing early is usually meant for the hardcore fans, and if you love the Prince of Persia franchise, by all means, don't be afraid to buy. I don't think you'll be disappointed, but you will have to check back frequently for updates. For everyone else, give it a bit. I would wait until the developer adds the final biomes and boss because runs will then feel more satisfying, and there should be a number of changes and quality of life improvements. I'm also hoping that the developers release a roadmap of sorts, which would be great for transparency because I will be returning to this game frequently because I'm excited to see where it goes next. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you going to wait and see how the Rogue Prince of Persia develops, or are you going to dive right in and watch the game grow as you play? Because that's going to do it for this video. If you like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.